Hello everyone, with Baldur's Gate 3 upon us, we have kind of a unique opportunity here with Dungeons & Dragons. I'm actually here with Dan Dillon to talk about the game. We've both been in early access for quite some time.
Yeah.
I'm very shocked at how much the Baldur's Gate 3 experience is almost virtually identical to the D&D tabletop experience.
Yeah, and it starts you that way right off the bat. As soon as you get into it and start building your character, I mean, it's like building a D&D character. It's set up and built exactly the same way.
For those that don't know, who maybe are playing the game,
Sure.
how close is it? Because it is remarkably close to my eyes of like,
Yeah.
it's all the same stats, it's all the same skills, it's the same roles.
Yep, skill proficiencies, classes, subclasses, playable races, all of that, yeah.
What stands out the most to you is in terms of like how close it is?
It's probably the fact that the class structure is exactly what you would see in your tabletop D&D experience. Now, they do some things, their own way to make it fit for the video game environment that it lives in, but I mean, it's the same, right? If you're building a fighter, you're going to be building a fighter that you are familiar with. And if you were to play Baldur's Gate 3 first and then try out D&D with your friends for the first time, it's going to be completely familiar, right? You're going to see all of the same fighter features and that you're, used to using from your character in the video game.
This is a great introduction for people who are curious about D&D to maybe actually learn a bit about D&D.
Yeah.
Like this game to me teaches you combat rounds and everything else.
Yeah, since the combat is turn-based, and I mean, even outside of combat, even in dialogues and interactions where it has, this skill is going to be needed to get this person on your side or whatever, it'll tell you what skill it's using, it'll tell you what sort of check it's going to be. You'll see the D20 roll and see what you need and what you're adding to it. You get to use all of your features, like if you have a guidance spell that can be used to help boost it. All that is there. So that's really just sort of visually walking you through.
Would you actually recommend this? Like if you had a friend that was like, hey, I really want to learn D&D, but I don't have a Dungeon Master right now. I feel pretty confident in giving them Baldur's Gate 3 and saying, you're going to figure it out using this, other than like improv.
Absolutely. Like if you're just talking about getting a hook into the imaginative feel of the world of D&D, the Sword Coast or Forgotten Realms in particular, yeah, for sure. And then if you have someone who's a video game player and, this is just, they'll be ducked to a pond in this sort of thing, then yeah, this is a great introduction to D&D for them.
I don't always get to play as much D&D as I would like.
Yeah.
This is a great way for me to figure out if I like a character in some ways, even from like the choices you get in the video game in terms of like what you get to say. You can figure out the personality or figure out, okay, maybe I actually like being a tank far more.
Yeah.
Once I've played a little bit of Baldur's Gate 3, instead of being a squishy wizard, I'm like, wow, I seem to die a lot because I'm putting myself in the fray in a bad way. I think there's like educational moments there.
Yeah, and the way the Larian has set up the combat system, it mirrors D&D so well in just the pieces and parts of how the combat functions. I think it's a really great way to try out different play styles. And since it's, not Twitch reaction-based video game real-time combat, it is turn-based, I think it's going to be very applicable to getting a feel for how a class or a spell set might work on your regular D&D table, but you can kind of beta test it out a little bit on your computer.
The one thing Baldur's Gate 3 can't at this moment do is probably teach you improv necessarily, or the back and it does. Like I love the dialogue options, and there are a ton, and choices that actually matter in this game. And that's another thing that's really important to D&D is things can go off the rails, and I kind of feel like Baldur's Gate 3 can go off the rails as well. You can make some choices that heavily impact the storyline. This is not completely linear.
Yeah, there's so many different ways that a lot of these encounters can play out. There's an encounter where you run into a gnome who's in a situation, and they are in some dire straits, and you can help them, or you can take the kind of jerk move and make their situation way worse. And I never thought to take that option, but I saw someone do that, and it blew my mind that was even a thing that you could do in the game. So just obviously you can't do absolutely anything in a video game, but this game gives you so many different paths and makes so many different choices available to you and makes them meaningful that it's really inspiring.
Someone who doesn't get to play D&D as often as they'd like, this is very cathartic of I can just jump in on my own time and play some D&D.
For sure.
D&D experience.
And that's a thing we hear sometimes, like, I can't find a group. I'd love to play D&D, but I don't have anyone to play with. Like, this is going to be a great stand-in for that, especially with just the breadth of options that you have and approaches.
I would absolutely advise someone, if you're curious about D&D, check out Baldur's Gate 3, play that, and you're going to get a sense of the action economy. You're going to get the sense of how social interactions work. You're going to definitely get the sense of how weird D&D can go. Yeah. Depending on your dungeon master, we've already seen some very interesting romantic options in the game.
Yep.
And it really does like capture that humor. So I feel like the art, the classes, all of it is kind of there.
Yeah, and speaking of the Dungeon Master, that's one thing that if you've never played D&D tabletop, that you will get a sense of having a DM sort of narrate and react to what you're doing, because the narrator in the game, that voiceover, I love it. It's so well done. It so takes smart. Over that Dungeon Master role where it sort of narrates to you, things your character might feel or sense or perceive that are not immediately apparent on the screen, and instead of just giving you text to read, it actually speaks it to you, and it speaks it to you like a dungeon master that's in the moment and loving every minute of this. And that is going to help the transition for someone who's never played in a session of D&D before, because it's different than other hobbies and other things that you can do, right? It's not the same as playing a board game or a card game with your friends. And so having that narrator, that DM voice sort of giving you, letting you dip your toes into that pool, you're going to be ready for it when you're sitting around the table with some friends playing D&D.
I really hope we get a lot of tabletop role players out of this game.
I hope so too. Yeah, and I hope we get a lot of just back and forth cross-pollination on it, right? That we can get so much inspiration on how to run your tabletop games from the video game. Just having the ideas of multiple levels to a combat. If you just add the rooftops as something, it's so easy when you're thinking about a combat as the little grid map that's printed in the adventure, or what you're drawing on a mat. Thinking about things like rooftops, multiple floors to a building, the interior of the tavern, not just the street that is drawn.
Yeah.
Thinking about that as a DM can really help you set up some just very memorable encounters that would have otherwise been kind of ho-hum.